Good day. This is Brian Tarian. It's my pleasure to have Jonathan Ginsberg with us today. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Brian.
Great.
Yourself? Good.
I'm well.
Good.
For those of you that don't know Jonathan, he's a very prominent attorney that lives and works in the Atlanta, Georgia area, and the reason why I'm excited to have him on the line today is he is one of the most successful people at attorneys at helping individuals get benefits. Got a great percentage, been doing it for a long time, really understands the system. So today, Jonathan's is willing to spend some time with us to talk about disability benefits specifically related to fibromyalgia. So I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but there's a lot of people that are out there affected by this. It's very difficult for people to understand, and they find it difficult to get benefits. So we're just very eager to hear what you have to say.
Oh, absolutely.
Great. So let's start at the top. You have worked for around 10 years in the Social Security disability area, correct?
I have.
Okay. And can you share with us your experience with fibromyalgia patients and disability claimants that you've had? Are they getting benefits? Are they being awarded benefits? Is it recognized? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I think fibromyalgia is becoming more and more recognized. I mean, certainly 10 years ago, it was less well known. I think judges were less inclined to grant on fibromyalgia to recognize what it is. I think over the last 10 years, as more and more press has been issued about fibromyalgia, more people read about it, know about it, judges become more educated. I think a lot of that, certainly in the Social Security area, is because attorneys have brought more of these cases in front of judges. And, you see a case once every 3 years, that's one thing. But if you start to see these cases, 5, 10, 15 a month, then obviously the judges have to recognize that something's up. So I think that, certainly at this point in time, fibromyalgia is pretty well recognized by most Social Security judges, at least that I've been in front of. I've been in front of them in pretty much all over Georgia and even in some states surrounding. So I think it's a pretty well-known situation.
Well, good. Here's one of the common challenges that I hear from our members is, I don't feel good, I have no energy, I'm in absolute pain, but my doctor does not believe me and he won't fill out the paperwork. What do I do?
What do I do? Yeah, that's a real issue because just as judges have become more educated, you still have out there a lot of doctors who don't recognize fibromyalgia. They don't believe that it exists. It's very hard to test for. It's usually a diagnosis of elimination once you find out what something is. If somebody has certain conditions, and there's some checklists that doctors can use, but again, it sometimes is misdiagnosed. Again, some doctors think it is all psychological. So yes, you can have a situation where your doctor doesn't believe you. And what I would say at that point is that as the patient, you cannot accept that if the doctor doesn't accept it, doesn't believe in it, I think you ought to ask your doctor, do you believe this exists? If the doctor tells you no, then it's probably time to get another doctor. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately in Social Security, you have to have support from your treating doctor. And if you don't have support from your treating doctor, it's a major uphill battle because Social Security, realize judges all day long see people coming in saying, I can't work, I'm disabled. And if they accepted everybody's word at face value, then everyone would be approved. Well, obviously they don't do that. So more and more, I think, especially as the numbers have increased, and as you know, the numbers are going up every month, I think that Social Security judges in particular are looking more and more for medical support for any type of allegation, especially one like fibromyalgia, which is dependent on subjective evaluation.
Mm-hmm. Great point. So, doctor doesn't believe you. You ask him if he believes, or her, if they believe in the condition in general. That would be the first step, right?
I think so. I think I would add, again, I think it's part of just a general discussion that one would have with his or her physician. What is your take on fibromyalgia? Do you believe that it exists? Do Do you think it is a psychological impairment? I mean, feel the doctor out. What does he think? Do you think it's physical? Do you think it is on the cellular level? Do you think it is a problem with energy transport? What exactly do you think it is? And try to get a read on what the doctor thinks it is and what, in his mind, would make somebody or would leave somebody disabled because of it. Again, I think sometimes you have to really ask the question of the doctor what his philosophy about this whole area is, because again, that's how you find out whether this doctor is going to be helpful to you. He may be very compassionate and a good doctor and somebody that you really like, but again, if you're applying for Social Security, you've got a mission. You've got that's your job now is to find support for your allegation that you're not able to work. So I think you need to be very forthright. Don't beat around the bush, and then talk to your doctor and find out what he says.
Yeah.
And again, if he doesn't believe in it, if he's real wishy-washy, not trained in it, and of course that's a lot of trouble too. Doctor's not necessarily trained in it, so he's not going to want to go out on a limb and diagnose it or support you with it. Then turn to some of the fibromyalgia support groups out there and do some. You're of course doing your own research. Find people who will support you.
Mm-hmm. And also people need to be aware, from my understanding from reviewing your work, that there are doctors that in general do not support a disability and are not in favor of it. So you also have to be conscious about that, correct?
Absolutely. There are doctors, and I've spoken to a couple of them just in social settings. And I remember one doctor, this is probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and he said, really, I really find it hard to believe anybody's really disabled. I think anybody could work if they really, really wanted to. Well, that's a pretty cynical attitude, but again, this is a pretty well-known guy, and he treats people. I guess I know he gets some business from insurance companies, so his bias is that there's no such thing as complete disability. And of course, the way I approach disability with physicians is I don't ever ask a doctor, is my client disabled? I ask the doctor to identify specific activities that the person can or cannot do. So again, when you say, am I disabled, that is an umbrella term, could mean any number of things. For Social Security purposes, you could be unable to do certain functions. For example, if you can't lift more than 5 pounds, that would theoretically disable you from certain types of jobs, but it wouldn't disable you from others. So the term, am I disabled, doesn't really mean anything if you're looking at lifting restrictions. So again, what we try to do is encourage our clients to identify the very specific limitations that they cannot perform and get the doctor on board with that. So you don't force the doctor, you don't try to pin him down to make this blanket conclusion that his patient is completely disabled, because theoretically somebody completely disabled can't move and do anything. But of course, most people who are deserving disability claimants are able to function in their house. They may have good days and bad days, but the question of the definition of disability is, can you function in a competitive workplace? So that's what we try to focus on. You have to kind of know where you're headed with this, so that you can devise a game plan that'll get you there. That's
great advice. Now, I'm wondering, do you find in the cases, in your experience, that people that are subject to or unfortunately have fibromyalgia have other conditions, or it may cause other conditions? Because in a lot of your work, I see that there are multiple conditions that are addressed, like fibromyalgia and depression, etc.
Absolutely. Well, I think that fibromyalgia, again, is something that certainly can cause depression. One of the things that you'd asked me before, and I didn't really comment on this, but one of the common characteristics I see from claimants is a ongoing desire to find treatment. I mean, most of my fibromyalgia cases are identifiable by the size of the file. And what I mean by that is that a claimant, and usually it's going to be, I wouldn't say all the time, but most of the time it's going to be a female, usually kind of a type A, hardworking type of female, someone who's maybe worked, a pretty high-level job, or working maybe even, a job that they're not necessarily trained for, but they picked up because they're such good workers. And they'll go to 15, 20 doctors sometimes trying to find relief. And fibromyalgia is one of these things where it kind of moves around the body. The common thread would be myofascial pain, where they're very sensitive to the touch, maybe digestive issues, balance issues, things like that. But the pain may move around. It may be in the upper body for a couple of months, and it may move to the lower body. So as the symptoms change, they may seek treatment with different doctors. They may go to an orthopedist or a neurologist, and they may go all around trying to find things that treat the symptoms. and of course the treating physician may be trying different types of medications or biofeedback, and so I think ultimately what you've got is that sometimes the claimant will have multiple diagnoses, even though fibromyalgia is probably the overriding one, but there may be, at any point in time, there may be specific symptoms that impair that person's ability to perform certain types of activities. I think depression is always a factor. Again, these are folks who have worked real hard. They've usually overachieved. They're high energy type of people, and all of a sudden they can't do anything. They sleep. They're just completely different person. They feel them like they're trapped in their own body, and who wouldn't be depressed by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about how to win. Some strategies. Now, on a separate part of our site, we've spent 90 minutes or so going through the entire Social Security system, so somebody can enjoy that as well as understand how they could use the process and use it as kind of a tutorial to assist in pursuit of benefits, right?
Absolutely.
So, is there any other tools, tips, tricks, things that you have, Jonathan, in addition to the guide that would be helpful for somebody with fibro to win?
I'd say one of the things I always tell my clients when I meet them early on is I say, keep a pain diary, because fibromyalgia obviously is a condition that is characterized by pain in various forms. And I think that sometimes it's hard to remember, especially since the process can now take 2-3 years to get from initial application to a hearing decision. I'd say go out and get a calendar. It can be just a drugstore calendar. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. And keep a pain diary, so that if you're having a really bad day on Thursday the 14th, let's say, then write it down so that you've got this calendar, and then 2 years later, if you're in a hearing, you can refer back to it and testify from that calendar that I had a really, looking at this month, 20 days out of the month, I had a really bad day. And I typically measure pain using a 1 to 10 scale, so 1 being kind of a mild headache, 10 being the worst pain you can imagine. And the best diaries are ones that might have, I was at a 4 or 5 all day long, but from 4 to 6, I was at an 8. And again, this doesn't have to be something every day, but again, fibromyalgia claimants oftentimes are pretty type A sorts, and they can keep this up for a while, and that can be very helpful in making an argument to a judge, and especially in remembering what went on, because fibromyalgia can also affect the memory, and certainly it's very hard to think back, 2 years ago what you were feeling like in March, 2004, let's say. But if you have that little diary, that can help a lot. So that's one thing I always recommend that they do.
Great advice. Okay. Anything else that you can think of?
Well, certainly these folks are many times going to many different doctors to keep track of all the doctors they're going to. I think that, again, this is part of the memory thing, or even for anybody certainly going to a lot of different doctors, write down the names and addresses of all the doctors. I think that, you have to just be really focused on what, the type of treatment you're getting, and be, as we talked about before, be very aware if you have a doctor who is helpful or not. I use various forms. I don't know if that's where you're headed with this, but I use various forms to track this, and that's basically what I use to win my cases is I enlist the help of the doctors to identify those very specific limitations that will convince the judge, and that's kind of what I do as far as my own practice.
Well, that's where I was going. I didn't know if you wanted to reveal your secrets to everybody, but
okay. Well, it's it's not so much of a secret. I think that this is again part of what lawyers do.
Yeah.
And really, I sort of do it my own way. And I think most people, most other lawyers do it their way as well. But what I try to do is, since I know ultimately when I get in that hearing, I'm going to be in front of a judge. I'm going to be in front of a vocational witness. And for those who are not aware of this, most Social Security hearings involve the testimony of an independent vocational witness, somebody who's there to talk about the past work the claimant has done and what the claimant might be able to do. And really what the vocational witness's job is to help the judge translate the medical findings into very specific work limitations. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to prove is that my client cannot function either at past work or at any other kind of work. And the way I have to do that is I've got to be able to convince the judge that my client's impairments are so severe that the vocational witness will conclude that given the hypothetical is what they do to kind of a pretend person, but given the profile the judge comes up with, there's no way the person could possibly work. The best way to do that, in my view, is to come up with enlist the help of the doctor to translate the medical findings for you, so that all the judge has to say is, Mr. Vocational Witness or Ms. Vocational Witness, assume that I find that the claimant's capacity for work is as described by Dr. ABC in this form. Would he be able to work, or would she be able to work? And that's to me the if you want to call it a trick, but that's sort of the practice that I use, and the forms that I've developed are usually pretty good about doing that, because again it's basically derived from a lot of hearings where I've watched those vocational witnesses. I know the way they're going to testify, and I know which answers are going to win cases.
Okay. So properly documenting documentation with the forms.
Well, properly identifying the specific limitations that the claimant is dealing with, and again, those limitations might be, as I said before, balance issues, digestive issues, which could cause issues with going to the bathroom too frequently, something like that. That could cause interference with a person's capacity for working. Certainly, fatigue would be a reliability factor. Unscheduled absences from the work site. Too many absences just in general during the course of a month or a week. Those are the type of things that I really like to focus on. I'm all about reliability when it comes to Social Security, because I think if a judge senses that the claimant is not going to be a reliable employee, the vocational witness is going to testify that there's really no jobs this person can do.
Okay. Good. Great. So when somebody comes down with a condition, and we're discussing fibromyalgia today, the general strategy should be is that they need to start, if they think this is going to be a debilitating condition, that they need to start formulating their case like right away. And I
think that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
You cannot. Unfortunately, most people are somewhat optimistic, and they like to think that they're going to get better. But I think you have to take a worst case scenario, look at it, and say, okay, if I end up in the disability process, I need to have a case strategy starting day one.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Good point. Now that we're on the case strategy topic, this is something that came up from our members the other day. Somebody had sent me in a note, and then we had a follow-up conversation, and they were suffering from fibromyalgia. And they said to me, Brian, I'm really struggling with how to go about this process. They have all the symptoms and the fatigue and the pain and that. And they were saying that, they were thinking about, taking a swing at going through the process on their own. And they said the thing that is going through and bothering me about this is they had listened to the interview that we had done, the general overall interview, and they have done a bunch of studying, and they know the process well. And they said, I just don't feel right, because I don't think, because of my condition and the fatigue that I have and everything, that if I go through and end up representing myself and have to go in front of a judge and I'm presenting myself, it doesn't look good for me, because if I could do that, as complex as the system is, the judge is probably going to think I could work. And I said, that's certainly something I hear. In fact, one of the things I have to deal with a lot of my fibro cases is I've seen this 2 or 3 times really in the last year. I'll get my client will come in with this notebook that is, perfectly, everything is completely in place. It is tabbed. It is typed, where all the medical records are itemized. I mean, it is a work of art. And I have got to tell my client, you can't, I certainly appreciate that it makes my life a little bit easier, but, that's absolutely correct. You go into court and you look like you have been a professional legal secretary, then, that can certainly hurt the case. So I think that, you have to, the truth is what the truth is, and you've got to go in and make every effort if you're going to go in by yourself to do it that way. But I think you have to be very sensitive to the fact that it could look that way, although in many cases it may have taken the individual a month or 2 months to produce this beautiful notebook. It certainly looks like something that is the product of a lot of work. So I think that is something absolutely to be aware of, and
not to certainly show to a judge. It's not necessary to do it that way. You can certainly handwrite the forms or provide the forms. But yeah, you've got to look the part too at the hearing.
Okay, great. Well, listen, we've covered a lot in a short period of time. Are there any other closing comments or suggestions that you would have for our audience and tips?
Well, I think for fibromyalgia, I will tell you that a couple of things that seem to be common to the cases that we take and that we've been winning. One is it seems like digestive problems seem to be a big deal. I think judges tend to look at that. If they see the person as having digestive problems and to a lesser extent balance problems, that is something that seems to be just a sign that the fibromyalgia is legitimate. I think the fatigue, the chronic fatigue, which goes along with it, that's again can be a little bit harder to document in a medical record, but that's something certainly you should tell your doctor if you're experiencing that. And of course the myofascial pain. And typically the words I usually hear from people would be, it's so painful I can't even have a sheet on. When I'm sleeping at night, I've got to turn the heat up in the bedroom because I can't even have any blankets or sheets touching me. That's kind of a term that I keep hearing, a phrase I keep hearing over and over and over. So I think that if you're describing it for either the forms or to your doctor, keep those things in mind because those are the things that judges are hearing day in and day out.
Wow.
It doesn't mean you can't have other symptoms that wouldn't be convincing, but those 3 or 4 symptoms are ones that I see all the time, and I think that I've seen judges cite in the record as well as things they find credible. Because I think that judges talk among themselves, and when they talk about what they find credible for a fibromyalgia patient, and I think that those are some of the things that I think are common.
Okay. Well, this has been great. I really want to thank you on behalf of everybody out there that is affected by this for taking the time and helping with the education process and the tips to win the case. Really great. We thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.